Take a look at this sentence. When we read it out, we pronounce the words. Sure. When we read it out, we pronounce a lot of the letters, but when we read it out, do we pronounce the punctuation? It's hard to say. It's definitely less pronounceable than words or letters, and we don't often think about punctuation, and it can be easy to forget its importance in a script. It can do things like indicate the type of sentence, remove ambiguities from that sentence, and show quirks of spoken language. And most importantly, it allows the writer to communicate with the reader. And as we'll see, punctuation does a lot more than you might think. Punctuation, at least how we see it today, was made possible by the ancient Greeks, who started using punctuation as a way for playwrights to communicate with their actors as to how their text should be spoken. You see, before punctuation was popularized, writing was done largely for the benefit of the writer, but punctuation made it possible for writers to keep their readers in mind. The Greek system of punctuation became incredibly influential over the years, and it morphed and changed and ended up in a lot of the present-day scripts, including the Latin script. For the rest of this video, I'm going to be referring to punctuation we use in English as Latin punctuation, as that's where a lot of it originated. Latin punctuation still has tons and tons of influence today. Many newly constructed scripts like Nko and Cherokee are starting to incorporate Latin punctuation. And even older scripts like Baybayin and Lontaro, which are two scripts from the Philippines, they're starting to incorporate Latin punctuation as well, using things like spaces and periods. And I'd argue that one of the reasons why many writing systems are incorporating Latin punctuation instead of creating their own is because, again, we tend to see punctuation as separate from the script. But sometimes that's not the reason, of course. Latin just might not be the best representation for the script. For example, sometimes it's just confusing to use English punctuation. Olchiki, a script used in several states of India, uses this vowel modifier symbol that looks like this little dot. It looks like a lot like a period, right? But recently, Olchiki has started incorporating Latin punctuation like commas and question marks. And so, to signify the end of the sentence, the script uses these two lines instead to remove any confusion about this vowel modifier. Another fascinating example of this is Lisu. The Lisu script was constructed by missionaries for the Lisu people of China, and it has been deemed the official script of the Lisu language. It uses Latin uppercase letters as its base, and it uses Latin punctuation to mark tone, which is the relative pitch of the word. So this would be pronounced u, and this would be pronounced u. When Lisu started using punctuation, it needed to make it distinct from tone, so two new symbols were created, the Lisu comma and the Lisu period. But despite the immense influence that Latin has had on all the scripts that I've mentioned, there's so much more to explore within the punctuation of other scripts. There are tons of elements that English doesn't have in its punctuation that other scripts do have. For example, in order to indicate a written abbreviation, the Modi script of India uses this little mark. It's definitely useful. Additionally, Javanese, a writing system of Indonesia, has a really extensive punctuation system. They can do stuff like indicate the social status of the writer and the reader. You use this character if you're writing to someone with a lower social status, you use this one if you're writing to someone with equal social status, and you use this one if you're writing to someone who's way above you. You can tell by the length of the stroke on the left of each symbol. There's a similar phenomenon in the closely related script of Balinese. This punctuation mark is used to identify religious text. You don't pronounce it, but it's a mix of several other Balinese characters, which roughly translate to praying for safety. Seeing this punctuation mark shifts the way that the readers interact with the text, indicating that it should be read with a more spiritual mindset. Another example of a thing that Latin punctuation can't do, we've got our question mark, but it only applies to direct questions. But what about indirect questions? In this sentence, there's a smaller indirect question, a question of whether or not you can read Modi. An Old Nubian, an extinct script from Egypt and Sudan that's related to Coptic, had a way of punctuating these indirect questions. So here's your direct question mark, and here's your indirect question mark. And these examples I've given are just a few of the many ways that other scripts use their punctuation differently from what we might be familiar with. Punctuation is a really crucial part of how scripts operate, and as we've seen, it can help establish a better connection between the writer and the reader. It can even reflect the values of a culture, like we saw with those Javanese honorifics. I hope that I've convinced you that we should give punctuation the appreciation that it deserves. Period. If you want to learn more about anything I've discussed, there are lots of links in the description. And if you want to support Endangered Alphabets, check out the Endangered Alphabets Patreon. And thanks so much for watching.